The avoidant is being crushed under a weight they never knew existed. Regret is moving through their system like poison, contaminating every thought, every memory, every quiet moment. They're replaying the entire relationship with agonizing clarity, but the film looks completely different now. All the moments they dismissed at the time are revealed as precious. All the efforts they took for granted are shown as extraordinary. All the patience they exploited appears as grace they didn't deserve. The person they thought was nothing, the person they treated as optional, the person they kept at arm's length while congratulating themselves on their healthy boundaries, that person has gone silent. And in the silence, the avoidant is discovering a truth so devastating, it's rewriting their entire understanding of what they had and what they've lost. You weren't nothing, you were everything. And they only recognize this now that you're gone. The regret isn't simple or clean. It's not just wishing they'd behaved better in a few specific moments. It's comprehensive devastation about how fundamentally they misunderstood the relationship, how catastrophically they misjudged your value, how completely they failed to recognize what was happening until it was too late to matter. The avoidant thought they were the prize you were lucky to have access to. They thought they were doing you a favor with their limited availability. They thought their presence, however sporadic and conditional, was enough because you kept accepting it. But your silence has shattered every single one of these delusions, and the regret of recognizing they had everything backwards is destroying them from the inside out. The agony of belated recognition. The avoidant is experiencing a specific torture, seeing clearly what they couldn't see when it mattered. When you were present, pursuing them, trying to build something real, they couldn't appreciate you. They minimized your efforts. They dismissed your feelings. They took your patience as confirmation that you'd tolerate anything, your understanding as proof that they didn't need to change, your love as something so abundant and reliable they never had to reciprocate it properly. But now you're silent, and suddenly they see you with brutal clarity. They see what you were offering. They see how rare you are. They see what they had and what they destroyed. This belated recognition is tearing the avoidant apart because they can see the relationship clearly now, but can't do anything with that clarity. They understand now that you weren't asking for too much when you wanted consistency. They recognize now that you weren't being needy when you expressed needs for reassurance. They see now that you weren't pressuring them when you asked where the relationship was going. Every single thing they framed as your flaw, your excessive need, your unreasonable expectation, all of it is revealed as completely legitimate. They were the problem. They were the broken one. They were the person unable to meet normal human relationship needs, while convincing themselves the needs themselves were the issue. The agony intensifies because the avoidant can remember specific moments where they could have acted differently and chose not to. They remember times you were vulnerable and they responded with coldness because vulnerability made them uncomfortable. They remember occasions you reached out and they ignored you because they were protecting their space. They remember instances you tried to deepen connection and they pulled away because intimacy felt threatening. Every one of these memories is now torture because they see clearly how they were choosing fear over love, comfort over courage, protection over connection. And they see how those choices, accumulated over time, pushed you to the point where you had to protect yourself by leaving. The belated recognition also includes understanding what you were to them versus how they treated you. You were their safety, but they never made you feel safe. You were their peace, but they kept you in constant turmoil. You were their home, but they made you feel like an imposition. The disconnect between what you actually meant to them and how they actually treated you is creating cognitive dissonance so severe it's threatening their entire sense of themselves as a good person. They're confronting the reality that they took the most precious thing in their life and treated it like garbage. And this recognition is more painful than any external punishment could be. The realization of what you actually were. The avoidant thought you were nothing, but your silence is revealing you were everything. This realization is hitting in waves, each one more devastating than the last. You weren't just someone they were casually dating. You were someone who understood them in ways no one else did. You weren't just convenient company. You were someone they felt safe with beneath all their defended exterior. You weren't just one option among many. You were the option, the person they compared everyone else to, and found everyone else lacking. But they couldn't admit any of this while you were present, because admitting it would mean acknowledging how much you mattered, and acknowledging that felt like giving you power to hurt them. The avoidant is recognizing that you saw through their defenses and loved them anyway. You saw their fear, their wounds, their emotional limitations, and instead of running, you tried to work with them. You gave them space when they needed it. You were patient with their pace. You accepted their limitations while gently encouraging growth. You loved them not despite their avoidance, but through it, around it, with a generosity they never acknowledged because acknowledging it would mean admitting they needed it. But they did need it. They needed it desperately. And now that it's gone, the absence is showing them how much they depended on something they pretended didn't matter. This realization includes understanding that you were offering them exactly what they actually needed, even though it wasn't what they thought they wanted. The avoidant thought they needed unlimited space, zero expectations, complete freedom to come and go as they pleased. But what they actually needed was what you were trying to give them: consistent presence that didn't demand they sacrifice themselves, patient love that could weather their fear, secure attachment that would help them heal their wounds. You were the medicine, and they rejected it while swallowing poison and calling it preference. The avoidant is also recognizing that you were the person who could have helped them become who they wanted to be. You weren't trying to change them maliciously. You were holding space for them to grow, offering them the safety required for that growth, being the secure base they needed to explore vulnerability. But they interpreted your invitations to growth as threats to their identity. They saw your encouragement as pressure. They experienced your belief in their potential as criticism of their current state. And in rejecting your help, they rejected their own possibility of transformation, the regret of how they treated you. The avoidant is being destroyed by memories of specific ways they treated you, behaviors they justified at the time, but now see as inexcusable. They remember being cold when you reached for warmth. They remember dismissing your feelings when you were vulnerable. They remember making you feel stupid for having normal relationship needs. They remember punishing you with silence when you asked for too much closeness. Every single instance of their cruelty, large and small, is replaying in their mind with the audio changed. They can hear now what they couldn't hear then: the hurt in your voice, the confusion in your questions, the hope dying incrementally with each dismissal. The regret is particularly acute around the times they made you doubt yourself. The avoidant remembers making you feel like you were too much, too emotional, too needy. They remember suggesting that your needs were abnormal when they were actually completely reasonable. They remember making you question whether you were the problem when the problem was always their inability to show up. They essentially gaslit you into thinking your standards were unreasonable, so they wouldn't have to meet those standards. And recognizing this now is filling them with shame so profound they can barely function. The avoidant also regrets every moment of their inconsistency and what it must have done to you emotionally. They were hot when they felt like being hot, cold when intimacy became uncomfortable, and they never considered what this temperature fluctuation was doing to your nervous system. They kept you in a constant state of uncertainty, never knowing which version of them you'd get, always walking on eggshells trying not to trigger their withdrawal. They made you small so they could feel big, made you uncertain so they could feel secure, made you responsible for managing their emotions while refusing to consider yours. The cruelty of this dynamic is clear to them now, and the clarity is excruciating. There's also profound regret about the opportunities they wasted. You gave them chance after chance to do better, to show up differently, to demonstrate growth. You communicated clearly what you needed. You were patient while they worked through their fear. You believed in them, in the potential of what you could build together. And they squandered all of it. Every chance was an opportunity to choose differently, and every time they chose fear, chose comfort, chose protection over connection. They're seeing now that you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because they never started showing up, and the regret of wasted opportunities is suffocating them. The understanding of your patience as gift. The avoidant is recognizing, too late, that your patience wasn't weakness or desperation or low self-esteem. It was a gift they never deserved and certainly never earned. You tolerated their inconsistency, not because you didn't know better, but because you were trying to help them feel safe enough to be vulnerable. You accepted their limitations not because you lacked standards, but because you understood. Those limitations came from wounds, and you were willing to help them heal. You kept trying not because you were pathetic, but because you saw something in them worth fighting for, something they couldn't see in themselves. This understanding is devastating because it inverts the entire dynamic the avoidant believed existed. They thought they were the one doing you a favor by giving you any attention at all. They thought you stayed because you couldn't do better. They thought your patience was evidence that you'd accept anything because you were desperate for their scraps. But they're seeing now that your patience was actually evidence of your strength, your emotional maturity, your capacity to love someone through their dysfunction. You were the bigger person, the stronger person, the person capable of sustained generosity, while they were the small, frightened person hiding behind walls and calling it boundaries. The avoidant is also understanding that your patience had a purpose. You were creating safety for them to grow into better versions of themselves. You weren't enabling their dysfunction indefinitely. You were giving them time and space to work through their fear, believing that with enough consistency from you, they'd eventually feel secure enough to reciprocate. But they mistook the safety you created for permission to stay stuck. They used your patience as license to never change, never grow, never push themselves beyond their comfort zone. They took the gift and perverted it, and recognizing this is filling them with regret so heavy they don't know how to carry it. The regret around your patience also includes understanding how much emotional labor you were doing that they never acknowledged. You were managing your own anxiety so they wouldn't feel pressured. You were suppressing your needs so they wouldn't feel overwhelmed. You were doing the work of two people in the relationship while they did the work of none and congratulated themselves on their honesty about limitations. You were bending yourself into uncomfortable shapes to accommodate their rigidity, and they never once thanked you or even recognized the sacrifice. They're seeing it now, and the vision of how much you gave while receiving so little is breaking them. The comparison to their internal experience. The most psychologically brutal aspect of their regret is recognizing the gap between what they felt internally and what they showed externally. Inside, they were falling for you. Inside, they thought about you constantly. Inside, they felt things for you they'd never felt for anyone. But outside, they were cold, distant, dismissive. Outside, they treated you like you barely mattered. Outside, they acted like they could take or leave you. The disconnect between their internal experience and external behavior is revealing itself as the most catastrophic mistake of their life. The avoidant is confronting the reality that they loved you, maybe deeply, but they loved you almost entirely in secret. They loved you in their private thoughts while rejecting you with their public actions. They cherished you in fantasy while dismissing you in reality. They needed you desperately while pretending they needed no one. And this split, this absolute divorce between feeling and behavior, is what drove you away. You couldn't read their mind, you could only respond to their actions. And their actions told you consistently that you didn't matter, even though the truth was you mattered more than they could handle. The regret here is compounded by the awareness that they could have told you. They could have said, "I'm scared, but I care about you." They could have communicated, "I'm pulling away because I'm overwhelmed, not because you did anything wrong." They could have been honest about the war between their feelings and their fear, but they didn't. They stayed silent about what they felt, leaving you to interpret their coldness as indifference, their distance as rejection, their fear as lack of care. They essentially hid the only information that might have helped you understand and stay, and the regret of that choice is annihilating them. The comparison also includes recognizing how they idealized you internally while devaluing you externally. In their mind, you were perfect, special, irreplaceable. But in their behavior, they treated you as ordinary, replaceable, not quite good enough. They compared everyone else to you and found everyone lacking, but they never told you this. They thought about you obsessively, but acted like you were barely a blip on their radar. The cruelty of telling someone through actions that they're nothing while thinking privately that their everything is hitting the avoidant now with its full force, and the regret is unbearable. The recognition of your worth through its absence. The avoidant thought you were nothing until you went silent, and now your absence is teaching them your value with brutal clarity. Every day without you is a lesson in what you were providing that they never acknowledged. You were stability in their chaotic emotional life. You were warmth in their cold, defended world. You were hope when they'd given up on genuine connection. You were proof that someone could see them fully and love them anyway. All of these things were invisible to them while you were present, but now that you're gone, the absence is outlined perfectly in the shape of the hole you left. This recognition through absence is particularly torturous because the avoidant can't fill the hole with anyone else. They're trying. They're considering reaching out to other people, pursuing connections that might distract them from you. But everyone feels wrong. Everyone lacks something essential that you had. Everyone is too much or too little, too demanding or too detached, too emotional or too cold. The avoidant is discovering that you weren't just occupying a place in their life. You were the only person who could occupy that place, and now it's empty and will remain empty because you were irreplaceable. The avoidant is also recognizing how much easier their life was with you in it, even though they constantly complained about the pressure of your needs. You made them better. You encouraged them toward growth. You believed in versions of them they couldn't believe in themselves. You were gentle with their wounds, while refusing to let those wounds be excuses for bad behavior. You held them accountable with love rather than judgment. You were doing all of this heavy lifting in the relationship while they coasted and criticized, and now that you've stopped, they're seeing how much they benefited from your effort. The recognition includes understanding what you uniquely offered that they'll never find again. You had a specific combination of patience and standards, understanding and boundaries, acceptance and expectations. You could hold space for their fear while also challenging them to be braver. You could love their current self while believing in their potential self. This balance is incredibly rare, and the avoidant is realizing they lost someone who many people search their entire lives to find and never do. You were a once-in-a-lifetime connection, and they treated you like you were abundant and easily replaced. The shame of their blindness. The avoidant is drowning in shame about how blind they were to what was right in front of them. They had everything they actually wanted and couldn't recognize it because it came in packaging their fear rejected. They wanted someone who understood them, and you did. But understanding meant you could see through their defenses which felt threatening. They wanted someone patient, and you were. But patience meant you wouldn't leave when they pushed you away, which felt suffocating. They wanted someone who loved them fully, and you did. But love meant you wanted reciprocation, which felt like demands they couldn't meet. This shame is about recognizing they were their own worst enemy. Nobody sabotaged this relationship except them. Nobody pushed you away except them. Nobody created the distance except them. You would have stayed. You would have worked with their limitations. You would have given them the time they needed to feel safe. But they couldn't accept what you offered because accepting it would mean admitting they needed it. And admitting need felt like death. So they destroyed the best thing in their life to protect themselves from the imaginary danger of vulnerability, and recognizing this is filling them with self-loathing they don't know how to process. The shame also includes comparing themselves to you, and recognizing they were inferior in every way that mattered relationally. You were braver than them. You were more emotionally mature. You were capable of sustained vulnerability and effort. You were everything they pretended to be while actually being defended and afraid. The comparison is devastating because it destroys the avoidant's belief in their own relational superiority. They thought they were the evolved one, the one with boundaries, the one who understood healthy relationship dynamics. But they're seeing now that they were the damaged one, the one too broken to accept love, the one whose boundaries were actually walls that kept out everything good along with everything threatening, the irreversibility of what they've done. The most agonizing aspect of the avoidance regret is the growing certainty that what they've done can't be undone. They can see everything clearly now. They understand their mistakes completely. They recognize your value fully. They know exactly what they had and what they lost. But none of this knowledge changes anything because you're gone. You've gone silent. You've moved past the point where their recognition matters because recognition arrived too late to prevent the loss. The irreversibility is hitting the avoidant in waves of panic. They want to reach out and explain everything they see now. They want to apologize with specificity and depth. They want to prove they understand and that understanding means they can be different. But they suspect strongly that you won't care. You've heard their words before. You've been disappointed by their promises before. You've waited for change that never came before. Why would you believe this time is different? Why would you risk your peace for someone who has proven repeatedly they can't show up? The avoidant knows the answer. You wouldn't, you shouldn't, and you won't. The irreversibility also means the avoidant has to live with this regret permanently. This isn't a mistake they can fix or a hurt they can heal. This is a permanent loss that resulted from their own behavior, and they have to carry that knowledge forward. Every future relationship will be shadowed by the memory of you, by the awareness that they lost someone precious because they couldn't overcome their fear. Every time they're tempted to pull away from intimacy, they'll remember what that withdrawal cost them. Every time they consider taking someone for granted, they'll recall the price of that assumption. You'll haunt them, not because you're trying to, but because losing you taught them a lesson they can only learn through permanent loss, the transformation through regret or the hardening. The avoidant stands at a crucial point where their regret can go one of two directions. It can become the catalyst that finally motivates genuine change, or it can become another reason to never let anyone close again. Some avoidants will use this crushing regret as fuel for transformation. They'll seek therapy and actually engage rather than just attending sessions. They'll do the deep work of understanding where their patterns came from. They'll develop capacity for vulnerability through practice and repetition. They'll build skills for staying present when everything in them wants to flee. They'll become people capable of reciprocating the kind of love you offered them, even though that capacity arrives too late to benefit the relationship with you. These avoidants will carry the regret as a teacher. They'll use the memory of losing you as motivation to be different with the next person. They'll honor what you gave them by becoming worthy of that gift, even if you never see the transformation. They'll understand that you were the sacrifice required for their growth, the person they had to lose to finally wake up. This path is painful but productive. It means your patience and love weren't wasted, even though they didn't save your relationship. They planted seeds that eventually grew, just not in time to save what you were building together. But other avoidants will use this regret to reinforce their defensive patterns. They'll tell themselves that caring this much hurts too much. They'll decide that being vulnerable leads to devastating loss. They'll conclude that their original instinct to keep people at distance was correct, because closeness leads to exactly the kind of pain they're experiencing now. They'll harden rather than soften, building even higher walls, becoming even more defended. They'll carry you as evidence that relationships aren't worth the risk, rather than as proof that their inability to show up has costs. This path means they learn nothing, grow not at all, and continue their pattern of destroying connections until they die alone, having never risked the vulnerability that genuine intimacy requires. The direction they go isn't your responsibility or concern. Your job was recognizing when someone's treatment of you required you to protect yourself, and you did that job by going silent. Their job is figuring out what to do with the regret that their behavior created. Some will use it wisely, most will waste it. But either way, they'll never forget that you were the person who went from nothing to everything in the space between presence and absence. The person whose silence taught them what your presence meant. The person they only recognized as irreplaceable when replacement became impossible. The regret of that recognition is destroying them. And whether that destruction leads to reconstruction or just to rubble depends entirely on choices they make with consequences you no longer have to witness or carry.